and welcome back to On Air with B&B.
I'm Brittany.
And I'm Bethany, and we are two mental health therapists with real talk and mental health issues that matter. So, Britt, today we are going to be talking about the 4 F's of anxiety in children and adolescents. In our last video, we briefly mentioned how the automatic nervous system ignites these 4 F's when the amygdala or the alarm system is alerted, when the prefrontal cortex shuts down and loses its function.
Right.
And remember, you might not remember, but if you watched our last video, we talked about how I like to call the prefrontal cortex the CEO, because he's in charge of all of the good executive functioning skills that we need in order to do so many important things. So when I say the 4 F's, what I'm referring to is fight, flight, freeze, and fawning.
Yes.
And I was kind of hoping that maybe you could shed a little bit more light on the fight stress response of those 4 F's.
Right. And so before we kind of dive in, I just wanted to point out that we're going to go over, healthy responses and unhealthy responses for each of the 4 F's. Reason being is because anxiety is important, right? And it's kind of needed, because what is anxiety? If for those of you who don't know or just want more clarity, I highly recommend checking out our first video, right? We kind of go in depth of what anxiety is and what it looks like. But for the purpose of this video, anxiety is just kind of like how we respond to stress. And there's healthy responses and there's unhealthy responses, right? And so for fight, in a healthy way, it's kind of like when any individual, but specifically our children and our adolescents, when they kind of self-advocate for themselves or set a boundary in a very respectful yet effective manner. So what do I mean by that, right? Let's provide an example. So let's just say Susie Q, who is in middle school.
I know her.
Right? I think we all do. She's in middle school and she walks into class, right? And let's just say that there's another kiddo, we'll call the other one Mary. And Mary looks to Susie and says, "Ew, Susie, I don't like your hair today," right? And what if they're both even friends or have that sort of relationship typically? So Susie, in a healthy way, can just kind of self-advocate in that moment and set that boundary and just say, "Hey, I don't like it when you say that. That really hurts my feelings. I don't appreciate that. Please stop," right? Very respectful, very direct, very much to the point.
Right. Or what if a kid, so I had this happen the other day, you just sparked my memory, and she worked really hard on, it was like a writing assignment, and she's in middle school, and I want to say she got a C on it. And she was just talking to me about how disappointed she was, writing is not her best subject, but she did work really, really hard. So she was, I guess, hoping for at least a B. And so I kind of encouraged her to advocate for herself or fight for, that B that she felt like she earned, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely. As long as and I think that's really important to kind of bring to light, that there's healthy ways that we can fight or advocate or even set boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. Responding to stress.
Yes.
So what are some of the unhealthy fight stress response?
Yes.
Example. Can you give us some examples of those?
So it kind of presents itself as anger or very confrontational, right? So if an individual is very irritable, very non-compliant or defiant, if you will, or even in the engagement of a tantrum, right? A tantrum is a big indicator or sign of an unhealthy, trauma response that's connected or linked to the fight response for the 4 F's of anxiety, right? So an example would just be if, let's just say we have 2 kids also in let's just say high school, right? For our older kiddos that are kind of tuning in, or parents who have teenagers, right?
God bless you.
Yeah. So let's just say you have 2 high schoolers and either two girls or two boys, it doesn't matter, right? So just two high schoolers, and they had some words, not pleasant words, right? Just words. And they're kind of in heated argument and yelling back and forth and saying very unkind things to each other, and it kind of escalates into a physical fight. That's
Hmm.
an actual, unhealthy trauma response that's also related to fight, right? Like it's like physical confrontation. It doesn't always have to be physical though. It could be verbal
Yeah, I was kind of thinking,
altercations.
even when you were saying like they had some words, having
That's
some words is
is fight.
considered an example of the
Yeah,
fight stress response because you're verbally
right.
arguing with
Correct.
somebody because you're feeling triggered,
Hmm.
and that, stress response has been again triggered.
Yeah.
So,
So yeah, and they're just not handling it appropriately in that moment. So
mhm,
it could look in the for the unhealthy, fight response, it could be verbal altercation, physical altercation, even engaging in tantrums if it doesn't involve someone else, right? It doesn't always have to involve someone else. It could just be, something as SIBs, self interest behaviors, even
yeah,
where they're hurting themselves, right? So it's essentially if you're hurting yourself or others, whether it's with words or physically,
yeah.
is a generalized kind of definition of what an unhealthy fight trauma response would look like when dealing in, you know, high anxiety moments for our kiddos. I think our next one is flight.
Flight. So
Yeah.
this one I'm very familiar with because I would rather avoid a situation than confront it, which is
Yeah.
more the
Fight.
aligning more with the fight stress
Yeah.
response. Um, so again, like Brittany mentioned, there is a healthy stress response example. There are many, but one that I kind of think of is, being able to, kind of make good judgment in situations. And what I mean by that is, so for example, and I talk about this all the time, you guys are probably so sick of it, but my daughter does dance and she spends a lot of time just engaged in her lessons, and you know she can get hurt from dance, but like we definitely don't want her to get hurt because she's jumping on a trampoline without a net and then flies off the trampoline
Right.
and breaks her leg, and then all of that hard work, she's out of the season,
Yeah.
because of poor judgment. Okay. Or let's say, she walks up on, your child walks up, on their friends at the playground and they have the monkey bars and you're supposed to swing from one bar to the other, but they're skipping, a couple bars at a time or hanging upside down from the monkey
Mm-hmm.
bars, like, look, and then let's say like my kiddo walks up and she's like, wow, that really looks fun. And her friends are like, hey, come on, join us. And she wants to. But that, anxiety, that healthy anxiety kicks in and goes, hey, like, if I do this, what will happen? I could get hurt and then be out for the season,
Yeah.
because I hurt myself. So we still want that stress response of flight to be there in order to help our kiddos make good choices. But when it is an unhealthy, flight stress response, it looks a little bit different and can like affect them in negative, our kids in negative ways,
Yeah.
right?
So just to clarify, you're saying that like a healthy, flight response would be if your kiddo, right, is on the playground and sees kids on monkey bars like swinging around. Sure, it may look fun, but then they're using their good judgment
Correct.
based off of what triggered them, like their anxiety in that moment. Like, oh, wait, I'm kind of like anxious or nervous or a little overwhelmed or stressed out that I might get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they kind of leave that situation. That's what you're
Absolutely.
saying.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And make the good judgment not to join in.
Right. So what would be like an unhealthy?
So I have a few of these. So just you touched on tantrums a little bit for like fight, but a tantrum can also be a way to avoid a or escape a situation.
Yeah.
So let's say, mom says, hey, Johnny, like sit down and do your math homework. And Johnny feels like he's not good at math, or he's not understanding the concepts that they're working on in class. And instead of I guess in his mind, failing at the task at hand, he feels like if he starts arguing with his mom or his parent and he throws a tantrum and gets sent to his room,
Right.
then that is actually better than having to engage in the math work,
That's stressing
right?
him
That is
out.
stressing him out. Exactly.
Yeah.
So he's avoiding the situation, and he's leaving the situation by being sent to his room because he
Yeah.
threw a tantrum. So that's
Hmm.
like one example that I see a lot in kids, and we're like, gosh, where did that come from? But they're really just trying to escape the task at hand. Another an example of flight is, going back to, we've talked a lot about how a lot of these symptoms of anxiety can look like symptoms of ADHD. And so if you notice, like, you have a kid who does not have ADHD and typically is able to be focused and attentive regarding whatever it is that they're doing,
Yeah.
whether it be homework, whether it be playing with their friends,
Hmm.
engaging in a sport or an activity that they do extracurricular, for an extracurricular activity, and they're normally focused, but then like you're watching them at practice and they just can't seem to focus. That maybe is just an example of their stress response like activated.
Right.
So they're not avoiding the task on purpose, but they're still avoiding the task, right?
Right.
Okay. Maybe they think, I just won't be good at this.
Mm.
And so today I'm going to I'm not, again, consciously, but I'm going to be distracted
Right.
to avoid failing again at whatever the task is at hand. Another one would be like preoccupied. And this is kind of looking like what I was just talking about, like with not being able to concentrate, but this one is more intentional.
Mm.
So let's say we ask our kiddo to start their homework or do the dishes or practice, um, like throwing the baseball around or football or a dance move. And we look around and we're like, where are they? What are they doing? Why aren't they doing the thing that we asked them to do?
Yeah.
And they're organizing their closet. Okay. I don't know about you guys, but like,
Yes.
my kid would never want to organize her closet. But then all of a sudden, she's organizing her closet and not doing, the task that, like, maybe she's afraid of or nervous about or worried about, like, not doing well or something like that. So again, like, if you all of a sudden notice like they're preoccupied with everything but the thing, then that is a really good example of
Yeah.
the stress response being activated.
Yeah. No, I like that.
Everything but the thing.
Yeah.
Is what I like to say. Procrastinating. So I'll go back to like the dance example again. My daughter has to learn this move right now. It's called a Valdez. I don't know. It's something,
Yeah. Okay.
where you go from like the floor to somewhere else.
It's a dance move.
It's hard. um, it's, every time she's got every other move in her solo, like down, this one move, and I'm like, hey, maybe you should practice it. Like, competition's coming up soon. I'll get it. Or if I don't get it, that'll be fine. I'll just make it look like, something else. And she'll say her dance teacher says, as long as you make it look like you didn't mess up, then it's fine. Instead of just practicing it and getting the move, which she's totally capable of, she's gotten a lot harder moves by practicing them.
Right.
So she's just like completely like avoidant and like ignoring practicing it at all. Like,
Right.
that's just her way, I think, of responding to that natural response to stress. But for her, she's a big flight person, just like her mama.
So
So
I'm hearing like a lot of avoidance and isolation,
yes,
leaving situations and things like that. But it sounds like the same action of removing yourself from a situation,
just in a different way.
it's
Instead
just in
of
a different way.
fighting, it's a more avoidant,
Yeah.
like, whereas fighting is more like running towards, I guess,
Like
like the
confrontation.
fear. Correct.
Right.
And then the last one, and it's always, I want to say too, like more focused on, again, just moving away from things that feel threatening. So that can be school, that can be birthday parties. If your child was fine, like you're like at the beginning of the year, they were going to school, everything was good, they were enjoying it. Now they're telling me their stomach hurts in the
Right.
morning, or actually physically getting ill, but you're
Right.
taking them to the doctor and the doctor's like, I can't find anything wrong.
Right. Well, psychosymptomatic symptoms are a thing.
Yep. That's a sign of flight. Again, we're trying to avoid going to school because we can't go, we're sick. Or, you know, again, with my daughter, she had a birthday party, a slumber party she was so excited to go to, talked about it for weeks. She gets there, there's 3 girls that she didn't know, so she went and sat in the corner for an hour, and it looked like she was pouting and avoiding everyone, but what she was avoiding was feeling uncomfortable and maybe not getting accepted by these new girls.
Right.
So that's just another example that I've seen personally in my child of the flight stress response.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they can, the healthy and the unhealthy in the flight can look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what really makes it different between, how can a parent that's watching, or even a teacher or a caregiver, or even a clinician who's kind of like needs some more clarity to help their clients, like what's the big difference between the healthy and the unhealthy, even though it looks the same?
Well, I guess it looks the same because you're leaving a situation or avoiding a situation.
Yeah.
But I think the healthy versus unhealthy, like the best way to clarify for me would be that in the healthy, they're looking ahead and saying, like, how would this work out for me? Because yes, both I want to do. Like, I want to engage in jumping on the trampoline with my friends without the net, and I want to go to the birthday party. But with the healthy, you're making the choice to avoid that situation because you could get hurt, and then you won't be able to do something else like that long term that you enjoy. Whereas with the birthday party, if you don't do it, you're only going to miss out on something, right? Like, and not because you made a bad choice, but because you were scared of engaging.
Right. So it sounds like the healthy version, right, of the flight response is when you avoid or leave for the best judgment of yourself.
Correct.
Right. And then the unhealthy, it sounds like you're avoiding and leaving things that you desire, you want to do, or could benefit from, but out of fear, which is a part of anxiety, you're allowing the anxiety to unfortunately dictate.
Yeah, and now you're not engaging in things that could be good for you or that you could enjoy.
Right. Okay.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Okay. And then that kind of brings me into freeze, which is the third F of the 4 Fs. And the healthy version actually looks, in my opinion, very similar to flight, in that you're kind of just slowing down, assessing the situation, again, for a good outcome, right? So maybe, normally we're moving really, really quickly, and when we're moving really, really quickly, we're not thinking super clearly, we're not organized, and so then we tend to make more mistakes. Whereas the healthy freeze response allows us to slow down, assess the situation. Should we do it? Should we not do it? That kind of thing. And so, in my opinion, they look very similar. The healthy stress response.
Yeah.
The unhealthy examples of freeze is, just, a good example is just like, it literally, like, it's almost like you do freeze, like someone came and took a freeze kind of, but but like for me, and I experienced this all the time when I was in school. I have kids talk to me about this all the time. I studied for a test, but then when I sat down to take the test, my mind went blank.
Or I
I
froze.
couldn't,
Yep.
right, I couldn't remember anything that I had studied. Then then I just filled the test out, I turned it in, and after all the information came flooding back to me because it was like I was now unfrozen,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's a really great
It
example.
is.
And a lot of people experience that.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of our kids have 504 plans and IEP plans or
Yeah.
some kind of accommodation at school because it gives them more time on tests, I think, so that if they do have this particular stress response, maybe they can use their, calming strategies or coping strategies to help them regroup, get the CEO back in the building, get that executive functioning working again, and still have time to take the test accordingly.
Right.
Right. Another example is just like literally verbally, like not being able to speak. Okay, we see this a lot in our selective mutism kiddos.
Mhm.
And for those of us who aren't familiar with selective mutism, it's when a child is anxious and they don't respond. So like we have a couple clinicians at our practice right now have a couple kiddos with selective mutism, and when the parents call, they talk all the time at home, or they'll maybe talk, with friends or certain friends. But if we see peers out in public, they don't say hi, even though they know them and want to say hi. Or my child will not talk to their teacher.
Yes.
They like their teacher, but they won't talk to their teacher. Therefore not asking for help, when needed, and things that are important like that.
Right.
So I say, and it's interesting because you think they're just being like defiant, like answer the question.
Right.
I've had a selective mutism kiddo in my office, and I ask questions and I just get like a shoulder shrug or
blank stares,
or I don't know, or yes, just a complete like just staring at me.
Yeah.
And they honestly physically feel like they cannot, like somebody has frozen them and they cannot get the words out. Like,
well, essentially what it is too, it's like a neurological shutdown.
Yes, it is definitely that. So it is a neurological disorder. So, and a neurological shutdown. Freezing, having trouble, this looks a little similar to flight 2, except for they're not doing it on purpose. They're not completing the task. So remember I mentioned like they might be like organizing their closet or doing anything but the thing.
Yeah. For flight.
Right, for flight. But for freeze, they're not completing the task, but they're also not doing other tasks.
Right.
They are just like sitting there doing nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and you're like, yo,
yeah, what's going
on? What are you doing? Like, are you there? They appear zoned out.
Yes.
Maybe they're daydreaming,
or disassociating.
Yes, disassociating. They're just not present. But I want to be very clear. Like with flight, they're doing something else. The procrastinating.
Yeah.
With freeze, they're literally doing nothing.
Yeah.
Because they're frozen.
Yeah.
And sometimes they even are. They speak of being unable to move, feeling stuck, and it seems odd because you're like, you can move, but they really cannot.
They definitely present as like very dazed or just detached in that moment.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's just the unhealthy freeze response.
Yep. There's a lot of them. These are just some of them, but these are just some of the examples that I see often that I wanted to share.
No, absolutely. And I think that's great. That kind of brings in the fourth one, right? Fawn, which is just a medical term for people pleasing.
Yeah.
This is a really big one because especially with our high schoolers, right? Like I think this is like a really big one for our high schoolers,
even just
adults, right? Like everyone really, I'm thinking about out loud now.
Yeah, people pleasing is so prevalent in individuals with anxiety.
Yes.
Whether it's been at a period of time, currently, I always hear people with anxiety speak of a time that they have been a people pleaser.
Right. And so I guess the healthy version of people pleasing or fawning, if you will, would just be like if it's something that doesn't necessarily matter to you in that moment. So what do I mean by that, right? Let's just say like we go out for an outing, like me and my friends, or like Bethany and I, we go out
Yeah.
for like an outing, right? And we just go hang out. Sometimes I don't care where we
Where do you want to
go,
go? Where do you want to
right?
go? Like, I don't care. But
Yeah,
if you really don't care,
then it's fine. Like you pick today, and then maybe I'll pick the next time, right? Because it's like I genuinely don't care. I'm just trying to hang out with you
right. I
and
just
spend
want to
some
spend
time,
time.
right?
Exactly.
However, there are times, and that's like a healthy version, I guess, of the
Yeah.
people pleasing. Like, no, girl, like you pick
I'm going
today,
to
and
go with
then
the flow because
yeah,
where we go isn't important to
right.
me,
It's just that we're hanging
so
out,
you pick,
right?
maybe it matters more to you.
Right. Or hey, I'm gonna make your like birthday dinner tonight. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are you craving? Or what kind of cake would you like for your birthday? Like, sure, in a sense, it's people pleasing, but it's healthy and that's appropriate.
And you actually want to do it.
Yes, and it's something that you want to do. It's not
You're not doing
anything
it
that
because you feel like you have to do it. You're doing
correct.
it because you want to do it because it
Right.
brings you joy to do something for someone you
Right.
love.
Absolutely. And that ties into the unhealthy, right? And the reason that what Bethany had just said ties into the unhealthy is because when it starts to bother you, right? Or if it's something that just doesn't sit well with your soul, that's my saying that if it doesn't sit well with your soul, buttercup, then you have to set a boundary, right?
Mm-hmm. Or you feel
Um,
like it's an obligation.
Yes. Yes. So if it's something that you feel like you have to do. Now, the obligation, it can look very different. So like when you feel like it's something that you have to do or you feel like you're being obligated and you even though it's something you don't desire, something that you don't want, that's the unhealthy version of people pleasing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for example, excessive compliance or just like outward like just very agreeable to the point where it's like yes 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 anything kind of like that saying like not having a backbone,
Right. Maybe you're saying you like things that you don't really like. Like I hear
right,
kids do this all the time. And this is something I think you probably work on in your social skills groups
right,
often is, like if you don't even know what you're saying, like please don't say it. So
right,
like I have this issue with children and my own child all the time where like she'll throw out some word that she heard from other friends or
or social
whatever.
media,
And I'm like, do you even know what that means? And
right,
she's like, no. And I'm like, so you probably shouldn't say it then,
yeah,
right? Okay, but you're saying it to fit in,
right,
but you don't even know what you're saying.
right,
And you can't even back it up, good or bad.
right,
Or like saying, like she'll be like, oh, everyone is saying, Taylor Swift is overrated or everyone likes Olivia Rodrigo and I don't really like Olivia Rodrigo, but I said I do,
to fit
and
in, to
right,
people please,
exactly, to people
right.
please.
And so it's also like pacifying behaviors, kind of like you know, obnoxiously and inappropriately like stroking someone's ego,
Mm-hmm.
right? To like make them feel good, to kind of like fit in, right?
Fear of
Fear
rejection.
of rejection, difficulty setting, maintaining, implementing boundaries with others or themselves,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like sacrificing their own
Your
desires and their
wants and
wants,
needs.
or
Yeah.
even just like, doing things that they're necessarily uncomfortable with, right?
Right.
So the reason that we're kind of bringing these unhealthy versions up is because this is actually like a really big one with our kids.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, like you could see it, right? So you're
I'm
feeling
just
it.
thinking it. I'm feeling it, thinking
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So like this ties into like, social media and like what kids are viewing and liking and posting, whether it's like pictures or videos that are very inappropriate. And when we're talking inappropriate, I'm talking about like, sexualizing videos and
Yeah.
pictures and things like that to be cool or to be labeled, for our young ladies that are tuning in or
Even our young
parents,
men.
yeah, like our young men and like our parents that are tuning in right now and even teachers, like this is a big conversation to have,
Yeah.
right? Because posting and liking and what they're seeing and what they're talking about at school is super important. Even the vaping and
Vaping is a huge
smoking in
issue.
general.
And a lot
um
of kids are like, I don't even want to do it. But then they're like, but all my friends do it. And
yeah,
so if I don't do it, then I'm not going to have any friends. Or
right,
I don't know if you get this often, but Snapchat apparently, I didn't know,
Oh yeah, that's how
is
they
is how
communicate.
they communicate
Yeah.
nowadays. Nobody, this is verbatim, nobody texts
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
Everybody communicates on Snap. And if you don't let me have Snap, then I'm not going to have any friends because I'm not going to be able to talk to anyone.
Right.
And I literally heard that like
Yeah.
from a client's mouth to her
Same.
mother the other day.
Yeah.
And mom's feeling super torn because she doesn't want her to have Snap, but then she feels bad because she doesn't want her kid to not have friends,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Yeah, and this is like a really big topic. So we'll probably have another video in the future. So stay tuned for that. Okay. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you get that notification. But yeah, no, the we're gonna get into kind of something that's a little uncomfortable, but this is one of the reasons I think Bethany and I started this channel is to have uncomfortable conversations, but in a safe space where you
right.
can watch it anywhere with avoiding that confrontation that could be uncomfortable in person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or conversing with a therapist over the phone, like virtually, right? But sexual acts between our high school, middle school, and some like older elementary
Mm-hmm.
kiddos, especially the ones that have like older friends or older siblings and things of that nature. And so, what do I mean by sexual acts? I mean, I've had like middle school girls and boys like saying of engaging in different sexual acts because it's cool or that's like what we're supposed to do, they said, right?
Everyone's doing that, or
Everyone's
I won't
doing
have
it.
a
Won't have a boyfriend
boyfriend.
or won't have a girlfriend
Right.
if I don't do this or that for him or for her, right? Another thing too is just kind of ties into the social media, but like sending like on Snapchat, like pictures and videos on Snapchat, Instagram, like in their DMs and things of that
Mm-hmm.
nature. It's just different pictures or even words,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like saying things that you don't necessarily mean, but they're just trying to say it to be cool, to fit in
Or even,
inappropriately.
one that just popped in my mind, like bullying, but not, I hate, not, I mean, bullying, but like even being, saying something nasty to somebody else online.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's say this is like a kid who normally, wouldn't say that, but then everybody else is doing it and they don't want to be the one who gets like made fun of. So then they do it, but they feel like it's wrong.
Yeah.
Another great example of people pleasing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be the one rejected. So I'm going to do something that morally doesn't sit well with me
Mm-hmm.
so that I am not the one that's rejected. So now I'm going to reject this other person,
Right. And they're doing this because they're also wanting to not just fit in, but avoiding conflict with their group of friends, right?
Yeah.
Avoiding that confrontation, right? With their friends or kind of being a target. They just want to fit in, but they're doing it very inappropriately without setting healthy boundaries. And they're people pleasing by engaging in things that they don't necessarily stand for or believe in, but they're doing it because they feel like they have no other choice.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is like a really big conversation to have.
It is, and I feel like we've spent a lot of time on this particular stress response of
Yeah.
fawning, and people pleasing, but I also, and this is just an opinion, but
Yeah.
I also feel like it's sometimes one of the most dangerous stress responses because it can start, in our littles and then just go throughout middle school, high school, adulthood, and
Yeah.
become a very um, habitual way to respond to stress that can just really affect us negatively throughout
Yes.
our lives. So,
Absolutely. And so I think it's really important just to be mindful, right? Like when you're looking at all of these four F's and like listening to this video, just noticing which characteristics are, a little bit more predominant
yeah,
in your
because you can
children and adolescents
experience one
or
or
multiple.
multiple. It just
Yeah.
depends.
Yeah. And for like very similar situations, one day Susie or Johnny can engage in the fight mode for a particular, oh, they have homework and they're getting overwhelmed. And so they engage in like a tantrum, right? But maybe the next day they have homework and they're super stressed out and then they engage in like flight,
Yeah.
right? Or they freeze,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it could be very different based on the situation and the child
Mm-hmm.
or the adolescent, right? The
Yep.
individual. And so, what are strategies that, Bethany and I recommend on managing these four F's? Well, I really want to encourage our viewers to check out our second video, because there's a whole video on how to manage
I
anxiety in
think there were
children.
like 12 steps that we added in that
Yeah,
one, which again, there are many, many more.
many
These are,
more.
we're just trying to minimize.
Yeah, and just tell you guys the ones that we use as professionals,
Mhm.
right? And that have worked for our kiddos. But just remember that just because it works, for us as a clinician and worked for most of our client population doesn't necessarily mean that it will work for you and or your child or
Right.
children. But these are just like helpful tools and tips to at least try out
Yeah.
and see how it works for, your kid or your children, right? But some really quick strategies that I always like to fall back or default to, especially regarding the 4Fs with anxiety. Mindfulness techniques. I personally do mindfulness techniques all the time, whether I'm in session with clients or independently on my own as just Brittany. What are mindfulness techniques? Like effective breathing techniques, right? Like inhaling through your nose, holding for a second or two, and then exhaling through my mouth and being very intentional with my
Mhm.
breathing. Meditation, whether it's independently or guided meditation through a different app or maybe even like another YouTube video that I
Right.
utilize. I find that helpful. Sometimes I will promote or encourage yoga, right? And that doesn't have to be like, these things don't have to be daily. It's on an as need basis.
Mhm.
Whatever you feel like you're going to need in that moment. What are some strategies that you would recommend?
I'm just kind of thinking of maybe like doing some of the grounding techniques. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
quick grounding techniques look like, I'm just going to go like maybe like splash some cold water on my face, or run my hands under like warm water or cold water just to change the temperature of something. Or I'm going to maybe say the alphabet slowly, you know, over and over and
Yeah.
over, because that will help me. It will distract me from whatever, ignited, triggered my alarm system, set off these 4Fs.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm now focused on that, it will bring my automatic nervous system back to, set point.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm able to think more clearly and regroup. And that's why they call them grounding techniques.
Right.
Also, maybe just talking with somebody that you trust,
Mm.
whether that be a teacher, a friend, a parent, a
A
caregiver,
mentor.
a coach, a guidance counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking with somebody can be really, really helpful. And if, all of these things are not working, or maybe you just don't know how to help your child or adolescent use them effectively,
Yeah.
seeking professional help is always a good option as well.
Correct. Yeah. And you can do all of these things and still seek professional help
Mm-hmm.
for yourself or for your
Absolutely.
kiddo as
Yeah.
well, right? And so, with that being said, Bethany and I just want to say thank you for joining us today on Air with B&B. Remember, your mental health matters, and we'll see you in the next video. I'm looking for somebody.